A few months ago, I came across a discussion online where someone confidently claimed that religion would eventually disappear. They argued that as science advances, humanity would slowly abandon the idea of God entirely, that eventually humans would become fully rational beings that no longer needed faith, mythology, or higher powers to explain the world. At first, that sounded reasonable, but then I started thinking about it more carefully. Because even in societies becoming less religious, people still seem to create things that function almost exactly like gods. Some worship ideology, some worship nations, some worship celebrities, technology, money, or even science itself. And that made me wonder, what if humanity never truly stops creating God? What if the desire for something higher than ourselves is built into human nature itself? To understand this, we first need to clarify what we mean by God. Usually, when people hear the word, they think of a religious deity, an all powerful being that created the universe. But throughout history, humans have treated many things as godlike without literally calling them gods. A god is often something people place ultimate meaning, trust, and authority into. Something larger than themselves that gives structure to their existence, and humans have always seemed drawn toward that. Let's start with early civilizations. Ancient societies created gods to explain things that they didn't understand. Thunder became the anger of a deity. The sun became a divine force. Death became the work of spirits or gods, guiding souls into another world. The Greeks had Zeus, the Egyptians had Ra, and the Norse had Odin. At first glance, it seems primitive, but if you look deeper, those gods were not just explanations for natural events. They were psychological anchors. They gave humans meaning in a world that felt chaotic and unpredictable. Now, here's the interesting part: science replaced many of those explanations. We now understand lightning through physics, disease through biology, and planetary motion through astronomy. But even as explanations improved, humanity didn't suddenly stop searching for meaning. The need itself remained. This connects to a philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead. People often misunderstand this statement. He wasn't celebrating the literal death of a deity. He meant that modern society was losing belief in traditional religion because of science and rationalism. But Nietzsche also warned about something else. He feared that once humanity removed God, it would desperately search for replacements, and history suggests he may have been right. Look at the 20th century. Several countries' political ideologies began functioning almost religiously. People devoted themselves completely to leaders, symbols, and national myths. Questioning the ideology became almost heretical. Mass gatherings resembled religious ceremonies. Symbols carried sacred meaning. Leaders were treated as infallible figures. The object of worship changed, but the psychological structure remained strangely similar. This points towards something deeper in human psychology. Humans seem uncomfortable with meaninglessness. We want purpose, we want certainty, we want something stable to orient our lives around. Psychologist Viktor Frankl argued this in his work on meaning. Frankl survived Nazi concentration camps and later developed a psychological theory called logotherapy. He believed humans are fundamentally driven by a search for meaning, not pleasure, not power, meaning. And when people cannot find meaning, they often experience despair, emptiness, or nihilism. Now think about modern society. Traditional religion has declined in many places, and at the same time, people increasingly devote themselves to political tribes, internet communities, influencers, or lifestyles with almost religious intensity. People defend public figures online as if defending prophets. Some build entire identities around ideologies. Others place blind faith in technology, believing innovation will eventually solve every human problem. Again, the object changes, but the structure stays familiar. And this relates to something called terror management theory in psychology. The theory suggests that humans are uniquely aware of their own mortality. We know we are going to die. and that awareness creates deep existential anxiety. To cope with this, humans create systems of meaning that make life feel significant and death feel less terrifying. Religion is one example, but nationalism, legacy, fame, ideology, and cultural identity can serve similar psychological functions. They allow people to feel connected to something larger and more permanent than themselves. Think about how often humans seek immortality in indirect ways. Some want their name remembered forever. Some want children to carry on their legacy. Some want to contribute to science, art, or history. Even when people reject religion, many still pursue symbolic forms of transcendence. It seems humans instinctively resist the idea that existence is temporary and meaningless. There's another philosophical framework that connects to this. Carl Jung believed humans shared universal psychological patterns called archetypes. One of these archetypes is often described as the wise old man or higher guiding force. Jung argued that religious symbols emerge naturally across cultures because they reflect deep structure within the human mind itself. This could explain why similar spiritual ideas appear independently in civilizations separated by oceans and centuries. Maybe humans don't merely invent gods. Maybe the human mind is predisposed to create them. Now let's look at artificial intelligence. Some people already speak about AI in almost messianic terms. They imagine it solving disease, ending suffering, answering every question, and guiding humanity into a new era. Others fear it like an apocalyptic force capable of destroying civilization. Notice how both reactions resemble religious thinking. AI becomes either a savior or a demon. Again, humanity creates something larger than itself and begins assigning mythological qualities to it. This doesn't necessarily mean religion is fake. It may suggest that the human tendency toward worship was deeper than any single religion itself. The impulse appears universal. Let's consider a thought experiment. Imagine a future where every religion disappears completely. No churches, no temples, no holy books. Would humanity suddenly become purely rational? Probably not, because humans are emotional, symbolic creatures. We naturally form identities, myths, and systems of meaning. Eventually, new belief systems would emerge. Maybe they wouldn't call themselves religions, but psychologically, they might function almost the same way. You can already see hints of this online. Communities form around shared beliefs with intense loyalty. People divide the world into good and evil, believers and outsiders. Some ideas become unquestionable. Disagreement becomes moral failure rather than intellectual disagreement. These dynamics resemble religious structures even in spaces that consider themselves completely secular. This is why some philosophers argue that humans are not purely rational beings. We like to imagine ourselves as logical creatures guided by evidence. And much of human life revolves around emotion, narrative, symbolism, and identity. Stories move people more than statistics. Meaning often matters more than facts. And gods, whether religious or secular, provide meaning on a massive scale. There's also an evolutionary perspective here. Humans survived through cooperation. Shared beliefs helped unify tribes and civilizations. A common religion or mythology created trust, identity, and social cohesion. People who believed in shared systems may have cooperated more effectively than groups without unifying beliefs. So over time, humans may have evolved to naturally seek shared narratives larger than themselves. But this creates an uncomfortable realization. If humanity always creates gods in some form, then perhaps the question isn't whether humans will worship something. Perhaps the question is what humans will choose to worship. Because humans rarely leave the throne empty for long. And that matters, because the things we treat as sacred shape entire civilizations. If people worship power, societies become ruthless. If people worship wealth, human value becomes tied to status and money. If people worship wealth, human value becomes tied to status and money. If people worship ideology blindly, disagreement becomes dangerous. The object of worship, influences the morality built around it. So maybe Nietzsche's warning was deeper than it first appeared. The death of traditional religion would not automatically create rational utopias. It might simply create new gods wearing modern clothing. Now, this does not mean every person consciously worships something, nor does it mean all forms of meaning are equal. But it does suggest that humans possess a deep psychological need for transcendence, for something beyond immediate survival, something that makes suffering feel meaningful, something that gives order to chaos, something that answers the terrifying silence of existence. And perhaps that is why humanity repeatedly creates gods. Not because humans are weak, but because consciousness itself creates questions too heavy to ignore. Questions about death, meaning, purpose, morality, identity. Questions science can sometimes describe, but not always satisfy emotionally. So, will humanity ever stop creating God? Maybe not, because even if humanity abandons ancient religions, it may continue creating the same psychological structures in different forms. Different symbols, different rituals, different names, but the fundamental desire underneath it all remains. Perhaps the need for God is not simply about belief. Perhaps it is about being human. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. If you didn't, comment what I can improve on and I'll try to improve in future uploads. Until then, stay curious.